Welcome everyone to our first Third Thursday event of the year. Today we'll be talking about the Writer's Toolbox, preparing for the year ahead. And we are joined by three incredible panelists that I'm so excited to have with us. Our first panelist is Kristen Bird. Kristen Bird is a novelist, teacher, and certified book coach. She has two suspense novels out with HarperCollins, and her third will be published in March 2024. She teaches high school English and writes in local coffee shops near her home outside of Houston. In her free time, she likes to visit parks with her three children, watch quirky films with her husband, and attempt to keep pace with her rescue lab mix. Welcome, Kristen. We're so happy to have you here today. And our next panelist is Lisa Olstein. Lisa Olstein is the author of 5 poetry collections published by Copper Canyon Press: Radio Crackling, Radio Gone, Lost Alphabet, Little Stranger, Late Empire, and Dream Apartment. She has also published 2 books of nonfiction: Pain Studies, a book-length lyric essay on the intersection of pain, perception, and language, and Climate, an exchange of epistolary essays co-written with Julie Carr. Olstein's honors include a John S. Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, a Pushcart Prize, a Lannan Writing Residency, Hayden Carruth Award, Writers League of Texas Discovery Book Award, and Sustainable Arts Foundation Award. She is the Ellen Clayton Garwood Centennial Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Texas at Austin, where she teaches in the New Writers Project and Michener Center for Writers MFA programs. She's also the lyricist for rock band Cold Satellite and curates an interview series with poets about their new books for Tupelo Quarterly. Lisa, it's so awesome to have you here. Thank you for being here. And then our final panelist is Kelis Rowe. Kelis Rowe is a stay-at-home mom and former homeschooler who writes sweeping classic teen romance novels from the points of view of grounded, self-possessed Black girls and the Black teen boys who just gotta love them. Her debut novel, Finding Jupiter, is a contemporary literary romance about a James Taylor and Beyoncé fan and a champion swimmer bonding through shared grief and falling in love one fateful summer. It incorporates journal pages of art and found poetry from the pages of classic novels, including The Great Gatsby and Their Eyes Were Watching God. Kelis writes novels that her 90s teen self would have loved out of her suburban home near Austin, Texas. Welcome, Kelis. And welcome to all of our panelists. I love that it's all Texas ladies here. I'm very excited for this discussion. And so I just want to jump right in with kind of a broad question. We'll get into some more detail-oriented questions about our toolboxes. But first, I'd like to hear from each of you what the new year represents to you. In what ways is it helpful for you to think in terms of a year when you're thinking about setting goals and intentions for your writing? And in what ways do you think beyond a year? And Kelis, I'd love to hear from you first.
Thank you. That's a great question. For me, what the new year means, I'm one of those people who I buy a new journal, every Christmas when they go on sale. And I have these huge plans to fill it out and get on track with every aspect of my life and just do better and be better. But usually what happens is I end up, circling, making my list and then circling things and then kind of moving it to the next day and the next day and the next. Since I'm a new writer, deep in edits on my second novel, what I've done is I like to try to plan a month out, 30 days. I feel like looking at the entire year ahead is just so intimidating for me, and I want to set myself up for success. And so I look at the next 30 days and what I want to accomplish on, what I'm on deadline for, and then on, the next little creative thing that's twirling around in there. So I love that a new year is like a new slate, but I need to break it up into 30-day spans so that every month I have a new, burst of energy, and I feel like I can look back over 30 days and see some accomplishments.
I love that. And yeah, there's nothing like a new journal at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
A good feeling.
Importantly, I like the ones that are not dated because, it's easier to look at 30 days whenever you want to pick up 30 days.
Hmm. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, kind of like Kelis, I tend to take things month by month. So for me, when I look at a new year, I'm not really saying, okay, what do the 12 months following look like? It's more like, what does the next month look like for me? I am the kind of writer who wants to put out at least a book a year. So that is always in the back of my mind. And then I have little mini projects or essays that I'm working on as well. So when I take a month at a time, I then will break that up either by weeks or by days. So if I'm on a really strict deadline and I know that I need to write 50,000 words in the next month, then I've got to write about 2,000 words a day, that kind of thing. Although I do try to give myself at least one day off a week, because I did a month where I did not do that and it didn't go well. By the end, I was just so exhausted. So I do try to build in breaks, but really it is a week by week, month by month kind of writing journey for me.
Oh, wow. That's really impressive. Lisa, what about you?
I've never been too focused on the new year or the idea of resolutions particularly, but I'm really interested in the way seasons have their different sort of spirits and resonances. And I grew up in the Northeast, so it was more dramatic. The dark nights, the long, cold, dark nights. The seasons are a little less pronounced in certain ways here, but they're still very present. And I feel like whether it's sort of literal and physical or metaphorical, I think around this time of year, it's a really useful time of year for me to kind of go inside, get kind of deep and immersive in the work if I'm able to. My life is sort of a rotation of semesters because of teaching. So there's a lot of a feeling of rolling in and out of them. And even though I've been doing it for years, I actually find the transitions difficult. But particularly in the winter, if I can sort of lean into a little bit of solitude, a little bit of hermitude, I find this is a really fruitful time of year for that kind of creative space, regardless of what I'm sort of producing in it. It might be a time where I'm actually putting a bunch of words to page, or it might be a time more of deep reading, or sort of deep looking at a river flow by. But I find if I can slow down at this sort of winter solstice time of the year, it actually sort of feeds my work in the months to come, almost like a little bit of an underground river might, if I make that investment at this time of year.
Oh, that's really beautiful. And that's a really beautiful way to think about the longer nights, the colder time, for it to be this time with yourself and really immersive in your thoughts. I really love that. Thank you. For many people, the new year, it's a time where they are either pulling up a blank page or recommitting to something that they've put on the back burner. I know that's the case for a lot of our members. And so if you could give us some insight about how you embark on a new project, or put another way, how do you go from that idea stage, maybe that deep immersive place, to putting words on a page? Lisa, if you don't mind starting.
I mean, I may be an odd one out here in that I'm primarily a poet. So for me, while I take notes, I'm never outlining or plotting. I'm not writing if I'm not writing. And for me, it has to happen in the ear. So the way that I kind of tap into the energy of any piece of writing is sort of through its music, or the rhythm of its thought, which might literally be rhythm. It might be about syntax, turn of phrase. So I'm trying to listen. And when I kind of can hear a phrasing or what I'll call a voice, I know that that's where I have to strike. Like that's where I have to mine. And if I lose that energy, it's like trying to put a kid down for a nap. You only have a certain window. And if you miss the window, you are not getting a nap for another whatever it might be, depending on how old the kid is. And if I'm hearing it and I don't kind of capture that, I kind of have to wait till I'm hearing it again.
Hmm. Do you find that if it's urgent enough, it returns to you?
I mean, sort of. Um, you lose things.
Yeah.
It's why you write on the gas station receipt or you pull over and you take out the notes app on your phone. And everybody's brains work a little differently. I hate the feeling of losing that sort of energy arc. And sometimes I get it back and other times I don't. I mean, I do believe in a deeper sense. Yes, it isn't like the difference between you will write that whole book of poems or not, depending on whether you can remember that one kind of moment's phrase. But I definitely lose bits. And so I try really hard to, no matter what I'm doing, to at least be able to jot down a note.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very good advice that if you're hearing it and it's calling to you, get it down. Kristen, what about you?
Sure. So I usually have a research or a reading period before I start writing. And I'm not writing historical fiction or anything that requires really in-depth research. So it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month or so. And then I'll give myself a deadline for when I actually want to start putting words on the page. And that just helps keep me accountable to myself. My husband likes to call them false deadlines because no one else in the world cares if I meet them or not, but except for me. And so I'll be like, I have to start writing by February 1st. And he's like, who says? And I'm like, me. So it usually is the first of the month or the first weekend of the month where I will declare to myself that I will put words on the page. And then I kind of have a rhythm where I'll write so many words, outline 3 or 4 chapters ahead. And really, an outline for me is usually just one sentence or one phrase that tells me what's going to happen in the next chapter. And then I'll go back, read what I've written, right, and then write to the next point, go back, reread, write to the next point. And I actually have heard a tip from another writer that I thought was helpful. She puts at the top of her page, no one will read this. And that kind of helps silence that critic in my head that's always saying, wait, will people like this? Wait, are you sure that you've developed this enough? All of those questions that we have, because I know that I will have time to go back and edit it.
Yeah, I like that. No one will read this. Just giving yourself the permission to get it down, and it can be messy.
Right, exactly.
Oh, thank you. Kelis, what about you? How do you go from the idea stage to putting
Yeah.
words on a page?
Yeah, I just have to say, Kristen's productivity is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And I have so much that I know I can learn from listening to her tonight. I'll say this, I'm new to writing. I kind of call myself an accidental author because I was a stay-at-home mom and homeschooler, out of necessity, not by choice. And then when my son went to public school, I had been out of my field. My field was market research. I'd been out of the field for so long that it was a whole different animal by that time. And I knew I couldn't go back. And I'd always been a writer, but I'd never done it professionally. I had a blog that was really fun. And people would always say, when are you going to write something? When are you going to write? And so I did. I wrote a book. It took me 3 years to write Finding Jupiter because it was kind of like a passion project that I wrote, when I was emotionally available to write. But when I got that idea, and I'm on my second book. But when I get an idea that kind of holds on to me, I have to write the entire idea, like in a stream of consciousness kind of, and then this what happens. And then after that, this happens. And once I have all of that in a notes app most of the time, because I'm on my phone, once I have it in front of me, I have to share it with somebody. Like I have to call my mom or my best friend, or a local friend here in Austin, and I have to say, listen to this story, and I tell the entire story. And I kind of do that just to share the high energy. And the feedback I get so far has been great. And so it motivates me, to keep returning to it and to flesh it out into a story. So it's not really like I don't have a system per se yet. Hopefully maybe one day I'll get to a point where I'm, thinking in terms of cranking out books. But right now, like, I sold my book. I got a 2-book deal, so I'm writing a second book. That's where I am right now. But I do have a third book that that kind of came to me that I'm really excited about now. So hopefully over time I'll have a system, but right now it's just getting the entire story out the way that I see it, and then working kind of backwards to figure out how to craft it.
I think what you said perfectly leads into what my follow-up question was going to be. How do you hold yourself accountable to like coming to the page time and time again? And I love what you said about calling someone and saying, making it kind of known to someone else kind of helps you stay motivated to keep writing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see, go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely. Especially for me, like, yeah, it helps to have somebody who's part of my life, who knows what I'm working on, to say, hey, how's that book going? Especially when it's one of my kids. My son was the one who kind of helped me really keep going with Finding Jupiter, because I'd given up at times. Like, what am I doing? Why am I writing a book kind of thing? And he'd be like, hey, Mom, how's your book going? And then I have to get up and keep writing it. So yes, accountability helps.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And Kristen and Lisa, do you all have a certain accountability measures you put in place to help you come to the page time and time again?
Sure. I am just really vocal and transparent about telling people what my goals are, especially my writers group. I have 3 women that I met at International Thriller Writers Festival, and they have really been a huge encouragement to me. I'm also at the mercy of the school year, like Lisa, in many ways. So that helps me hold myself accountable, I think, because I know that my editor, my agent will be expecting something by such and such a date. And I know that my weekends or my holidays or my summers are the primary time that I'm going to get to sit and have focused writing time. So I think that kind of pushes me to schedule my writing in a way that I might not if I didn't have a job that followed a certain rhythm of the school year.
What about you, Lisa?
I mean, I think I'm most accountable to the feeling of like unhappiness or pressure in my chest if I don't write for too long. I don't have a specific set of goals. I mean, I could list a bunch of things that would make me unhappy, like not writing, or I'm very grateful to have the chance to publish, or at least in the past to have had a chance to publish. But I don't have. I really just want to write the next poem, and I want to be inside of time the way it feels when I'm writing. And can spend literally, 7 or 8 hours thinking about where the commas or the line breaks go for a suite of poems or something like that. So, I don't, in my part of the field, I'm not working with, I mean, I have deadlines, but usually the bulk of the work is done. And then the deadlines kind of trail after almost, or happen after that work has been done. So it's really it's more of a private thing. I do it because I need to, I want to. It is a different quality of time. It's a different way of thinking than anything else makes available to me. So that's why I do it. Accountability is, I think, to myself to try to continue to make space for it, because so many other things, of course, do crowd in. So for me, trying to I just try to go away sometimes. I try to, because I don't have a ton of immersive space in my daily life, I try to punctuate the year with at least a couple of opportunities where I can really sort of be feral with it and not be accountable to any other kinds of schedules or responsibilities. And then that again helps me that gives me momentum for the times when I'm just stealing smaller blocks of time. And I think it's really important and useful to have readers, to have people in your life that understand the sort of constant sense of searching that you exist in as a writer. I also have found for me, it's really important to think about when I'm ready to share work or when I'm ready and how I want to talk about it, because it's actually a very private, protected space, that generative space. And to talk about it at the wrong time or in the wrong way, it can disrupt the sort of the cave, if you will, that the work needs to germinate in. So I try to be mindful of that. I need the companionship, but I also don't want to expose things prematurely.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about going feral with it. Yes, I love the idea of punctuating your year with times in which you can go feral and have that space. I think that's really great advice. Um, do you um, do you kind of feel differently about your prose projects, or is it the same feeling towards those projects?
I was surprised by how much they did share with my feeling in writing poetry. I think that work has different time signatures that it requires and it exists in. So the book of epistolary essays that I co-wrote with a friend, um, I could dip in and out of that. And when I dipped in, I needed really concentrated time, but that could kind of hopscotch, and there could be weeks in between it, or even a month and a half in between when I would enter and exit that concentrated time. Whereas the other book of prose that I wrote, I needed for that particular project, because it's all interconnected, I needed longer periods of time because I would lose the thread. Um, and if I didn't have a longer stretch of days, I would, if I only had a couple hours, it would take me all that time to kind of re-enter, and then I wouldn't have time to progress. And poems, generally, they're on a shorter time signature. I generally can enter into them with sort of immersive bursts. But that varies too, depending. Sometimes I've written long poems or long sequences. So I think I liked the work it's from us, it's also outside of us, and you need to be able to see what it needs. And in a sense, kind of collaborate with it to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's really well put. Speaking really like practically tools wise, is there anything you all use to kind of organize yourselves, organize your projects? For example, do any of you like log your time or your word count, or do you use Scrivener? Or Lisa, when you're putting a collection together, are you using the wall? What kind of practical tools do you all use to keep your projects organized and moving forward? Kristen, I'll start with you.
Sure. I've mentioned how I have a word count set up for myself, and I don't have a tracker, but I do mentally track it for myself. And like I said, I share with other writers how I'm doing with it. When I was on a really strict deadline, the month where I wrote 2,000 words a day, I actually filmed myself on TikTok. I would do a quick check-in, just 10, 15 seconds, and say, wrote my 2,000 words today. It went well, or it went very badly, or whatever it was. And I knew that not many people would be seeing that, but it just helped me stay accountable. I tend to write in Word, and so I separate everything into little folders, usually by part 1, part 2, part 3, and by chapters. And then I also like to keep a sketchbook nearby. And I attended a creative workshop, not creative writing, just a creativity workshop years ago, and they had us keep a sketchbook with us. And I'm not an artist by any means, but the reason that I use a sketchbook is because it helps me to visually map out the direction that I want my book to go. So instead of having just a straight outline with boom, 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 chapter, 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 I can actually put it out visually, or I can take a character sketch and actually like draw the person's head, not very well, and then write all of the characteristics or the experiences that I'm thinking that they've been through around them. And so that just helps me visually see things in a different way rather than writing all the time.
Oh, I love that, a sketchbook. Taking away the lines probably helps just kind of free that up. What about you, Kelis?
I I'm very much, where I have the story idea and I have to get it all on paper and just talk about it as if I'm gossiping about this thing that happened to this person, the main character. Once I'm past that point and I know what I'm going to write, I have to outline, and I can spend so much time outlining because I need to be able to see it. I need to be able to see the entire journey of all the characters. And so I'm always outlining in Word. I was using Scrivener, but my laptop died once and I haven't been able to figure out how to get that back. But Scrivener was wonderful. I loved how everything was pre-programmed and very organized into folders and text groups and everything. But yeah, I use Word. I also sketch. I am an artist in my head. And so I also do the character. Like I have this huge moleskin and I might put the character's name like in the middle of the 2 pages and then just fill it up with story, things that happened to them in childhood, their favorite color, like everything about them that I can think of, I fill the page up. And that helps me feel like I know the character a little bit more. But yeah, outlining in Word and just, hammering down the outline until I have a book. Yeah.
Oh, I love that you both sketch. That's really cool. And not something I'd heard before. So that's a really good takeaway. Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, I mercifully am usually working with smaller units, and so they're a little bit more manageable. And I tend to try to inhabit the poems and the drafts of those poems one at a time without trying to think ahead about how they might work together as a book prematurely, because I feel like for me that would freeze me up or make me, if I had too developed an idea, it would actually potentially limit sort of the range or the experimentation that I might otherwise explore. But within the unit of the poem, one thing that I've always done that I always assume everybody does, but then I talk to other people and they don't. So it may just be a me thing, but I also work in Word and I religiously save as, save as, save as. So every poem or small essay or chunk of a prose project, it has a title, working title, and it has a folder. And in that folder, there might be 3 drafts. So it'll just be, it's called Crimson, Crimson 1, Crimson 2, Crimson 3. And so that I don't have to judge or make decisions, as soon as I start to revise any version, I immediately save it as the next version of itself, because that frees me up to not worry that I'm going to lose something or have to backtrack to find, because sometimes we revise and we make it better, and other times we kill its spirit. And I don't want to be living with any of that anxiety. I want to be feeling very free. And so that's my safety net, is to make sure that I am saving a version of every iteration and I can always go back. And the truth is, I have individual poem folders that have, 22 versions. And I've never looked back because I have felt confident that the final version is the right one. But other times I very much have relied on that ability to kind of go back in time, rewind a little bit, but without having to hold it all upstairs.
Yeah, that is, for any poets out there, that is fantastic advice. You just go ahead and make a folder for that poem keep your drafts in it. I did not realize how I'm a poet, and I just remember when I was starting out, I didn't organize that way. And so my poetry folder has always been a mess. But if I'd started out putting having an individual folder for every poem, it would be so much cleaner in there. That's really, really great advice.
Yeah,
I
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
go ahead, no,
I thought you
please.
were trying. I actually love that you said that, Lisa. Sorry for interrupting, but I love that you said that so much. That's how I keep track of my novels. And I know it might sound crazy for a document that of that size, but I always, when I'm done writing, I save as, and if I'm in a zone where I know I'm writing every day, I'll save it as the month and the year. But I usually will put the date so that I remember. And anything that I cut, like if I cut anything more than like a sentence, unless it's a really, really good sentence that I think I might want to use for something else, I'll cut it and I have a dump file. So I'll have my book document and then I'll have a Word document open and it'll be called, the name of the book and cuts. And it's just a massive document of everything that I cut from the book. And it's always sequential and dated so that I can always go back and find things and use them over time. But I'm paranoid about like sending my editor the wrong version of a book, which has happened. So yeah, I do the same thing. I was glad to hear Lisa say that because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, that's like really fantastic advice. Save your versions. You never know when you'll want something back. I know they say kill your darlings, but sometimes the darling is worth saving. Um, so what happens, or how do you keep the spark, like feed the spark? Right now we're at the beginning of the year, everyone's excited, everyone's, starting on new things, they've got new ideas they're jumping on. What is, say you start a new project in January, what is 6 months down, or you have an idea in January, or you think you have a theme that you're writing on. How do you kind of keep the inspiration alive over time? What does like June look like then? And I'll start with you, Kelis.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I think because of where I am in my career as a writer, I'm so new to it that right now I'm in kind of I'm in a weird space. I love to hear Lisa talk about her writing process because it's so romantic and when I feel the groove, I want to get to that point. But right now I sold a second book, so I gotta write a second book. So that's where I am. And but what happens is I don't know. I do give myself time. Fortunately, I have an editor who also gives me time to find the character or to find the story that I'm just super excited to share. I write for teenagers and I write from a heart space that when I share it to them, I want it to feel like a gift. So fortunately, I have an editor who gives me time to do that. And so if I'm starting with a project, which so far, knock on wood, I have started with projects that I'm very passionate about. There's kind of an internal drive, that keeps me excited to see what happens next with, a particular character or storyline. So, being able to write from a space of inspiration, like being inspired to write. And yes, I have a deadline, but I'm also super excited to be here, So there is a romanticism to it that I get to experience too. But I'm really looking forward to what I write next because I'm very excited and passionate about it, but it won't be on deadline. It's not sold yet. So I get to be back in that space of, just pulling things down from the universe and just creating something purely out of passion.
Yeah, I love it from that heart space, like you said. That's a beautiful way to put it. What about you, Kristen?
So I feel like I'm like the schedule queen because um, I'm a little type A if you can't tell, but just like I schedule the day I'm going to start writing or when I'm going to be done with my research, I also schedule time off for myself because I know that I need to rest and I also need to let my manuscripts rest and have some space before I go back and edit them. So for example, this year, even though I'm off in the summers and that's my prime time to write, I took the entire month of June off. And I did that because I had had a really challenging second semester of the school year. And I was in a place with my novel where I felt like I needed some distance from it. And so I calendarized that 30 days off for myself, and it alleviates any pressure that I might have to reach some kind of artificial goal if I know that this will be my downtime. So that's how I do it, is calendarizing, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to know that you have to calendar and rest, and it's important to let work rest. I think that's really great advice. Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo that I mean our brains need it, but our ability to see our work needs it. It needs to percolate. I remember learning as a teenager, and it's one of those things where I hope this is true. But I was I was at a tennis camp, and the pro was explaining that it was important to take time off from practicing, especially when you were like learning a new set of skills, and that you would come back if you took 3 days off after a time of sort of intensive training, you would be better than if you had just kept going every single day. So I think for all kinds of reasons, periods of rest are incredibly important. For me, I see it most obviously, I mean, yes, in my sort of stamina and energy, but also my clarity. Like when you're writing, you're taking something from inside and you're bringing it outside. And you want it to be able to communicate to another human being, right? It's becoming this bridge between you and another person. It's becoming its own thing. And it's very hard to see it as outside of you. And that's a place where rest and a little time away is sort of miraculously effective, just really, really essential. So I would definitely echo that. And I think I've found, like I was wanting to ask, so in your month off, what if you had a great idea? What if you really wanted to write? And what I've noticed in myself is when I've let myself off the hook, like I'm just sort of beating my head against the wall. I'm trying. I'm feeling like I'm dead ending or lacking inspiration. As soon as I let myself off the hook and say, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to write for a while. Maybe I'm not going to finish this project. Maybe I'm not going to finish this poem. It's actually once I kind of let myself off the hook that I often find my desire again to come back and say, oh, but maybe what about this? So sometimes just making space for that it's not an obligation. I mean, contracts and deadlines notwithstanding. And I'm just a really big believer in making space to recognize and follow your fascinations. And for me, often, maybe other writing, obviously that feeds us, but sometimes it's about taking up a daily practice of swimming or going and seeing dance performed or sinking into a bunch of really interesting films or an immersive space with music. I love turning to other art forms because it sort of releases me from a lot of the front brain thinking. But at the same time, there are so many parallels. I love the way that form and timing play out in other kinds of mediums, and the way it stimulates me then to think about how I might translate that into a literary context.
Oh yeah, I think that's a fantastic advice, both to like relieving the pressure, how that can help you generate. And then I love what you said about, doing other things that aren't writing, but that feed your writing. Kristen and Kelis, I'd love to hear if there are activities that kind of feed your writing life that aren't writing related. Kelis, you mentioned sketching. Is that something that helps your writing?
I'm a person who historically, like I have hobbies that I'll pick up. A few years ago, I taught myself how to knit online, and then I had to knit all the things, and then I kind of put the knitting down, and then, I'll move around in that kind of way. But I can honestly say, since I started writing, well, since I sold my book, and I've been kind of part of the, publishing world, it's been really hard. I sold my book and I also had another baby like during the pandemic. So like I'm still recovering and trying to figure out what life is supposed to look like. We also moved houses, and so I have a teenager and a toddler. And honestly, I have, things that I would like to do. I would like to pick guitar back up. I taught myself how to play guitar in college. I'd love to do that again. I love to play ukulele. I have these things that I kind of would like to do, but so much of my energy in life right now is just it's poured into my writing, because I'm on deadline. So I have the family. I'm locked away right now from my family to be on Zoom, but all my creative energy is focused on so much on the book that I'm producing, that when I do have time to kind of feed myself or the creative part of myself, I'm returning back to books that I've read a million times. I'm returning back to movies and TV shows that I know, I could tell you what's going to happen next because I've watched it so many times. I kind of, turn my brain down a little bit creatively. So yeah, once I'm on a learning curve. So once I get out of the obligation, I think, to meet a deadline, and I can, start on my third book from a more creative space, I think my life will be set up where I can, knit more and, learn
Yeah.
something on guitar, etc. But right now I'm trying to figure it out. That's where I am.
Yeah, you need that
Creatively.
pressure valve release.
Yes.
I'm curious, what is your reread? What is your comfort read?
What am I comfort reading right now? Oh, you know what? There's a book. I'm actually about to do an event with Jennifer Niven's All the Bright Places. I have like a ton of books that are stacked all around my bedroom. So I'm looking like, what am I reading? All the Bright Places I return to and cry every time. What other books do I return to? The Hunger Games. I've read it so many
Oh,
times.
nice. Yes.
That's the book. Like if anybody who knows me or has followed me on social media, that's a book a series actually that I just reread constantly. I'm constantly rereading that one. Yeah. So those are two.
I love that.
Yeah.
Kristen, what about you? What kind of feeds you're writing that's not necessarily writing?
Yeah, I think going on small trips with my family is really helpful for me. Um, First, it's making me get away from just sitting at my laptop. And then secondly, it's giving me places that I can maybe include in my novels in the future, but I'm not going there with that purpose in mind. But when I do start writing, I usually start with setting. And so like my next novel is set in the Texas Hill Country, and my family and I have been there several times just for fun. We took a rafting trip down the Guadalupe that was almost went very wrong, so like those kind of outings, I guess, with my kids or with my husband, they're really helpful to recharge me, and then also to give me future kind of like what if scenarios, what if this family went missing along the Guadalupe or whatever. So that's really important to me. And then just little things I like to do. I really enjoy baking. I'm an avid reader too. I'm reading Babel right now by R.F. Kuang. And I read Yellowface by her last year. And I'm just like, I marvel that she can write in two different genres so well and so seamlessly. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but I think that reading and baking are definitely like immediate escapes for me, daily escapes if I can't get on an outing to a museum or out to the hill country or something with my family.
Oh yeah, baking is so soothing to the brain. That's a good one. Um, how does community factor in for each of you? I know you've mentioned your families. What about your literary families? How do you balance kind of the need for solitude in order to do this work that we do and your desire to like connect with other writers? How do you decide, what to take on, what to say no to? What is just your general disposition towards the literary community? Lisa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's an evergreen question. And I think that for me, it's something I feel my way through. I think that I'm like many people, I'm a real combination introvert, extrovert. I really need both things. I really like to connect. I really like to be in relationship, and I really need time alone. So I think I just try to make ways to honor both and recognize that for me, it's a feeling out with a goal of including space for both, but not something that I can necessarily predict. But I like, this is very sort of literal and banal, but I keep a paper calendar, and it's the type where you see a whole month at a time. Because I need to see how the obligations and the scheduling is stacking up, not one day at a time, not one week at a time, but across weeks. And I'll often make decisions based on that, right? Like, and when I've tried to go down to a shorter, like a week-long calendar, I get stopped up, because if you actually have to turn the page to see how busy you were the week before or how busy you're going to be the week after, I don't make good decisions, right, about the week that I'm in or considering. I have to see a slightly larger period of time and think to myself, like, oh, wow, there's a lot already in this month. This is already full or busy or too many comings and goings. And so that's just a very literal way that I try to thread the needle.
Yeah. What about you, Kelis?
I'm actually, I'm on my learning curve, but I'm a hermit. I am a Virgo. I'm a real hermit. I, create in a bubble. When I was writing Finding Jupiter, I think it took me so long because I was just so private about the actual content. Like once when I had the story, I could call my friend and say, hey, listen, and everything that happens. But once I started pouring into it, I'm very private. And now that I've, sold the book, I'm in, the publishing industry, I know that I cannot create privately. Like I have to share pages, I have to get feedback. And that's a huge growing pain for me. I recently joined a writing group, and I'm in this space right now where I'm kind of like, lurking in the group, not really jumping in, doing a lot of the social things, but I do a lot of the industry kind of things. Like I like to show up for people's readings and connect in that way. But my biggest growing pain and my biggest learning curve is to learn how to, show up and write in community. I love the sessions where we can write and not speak. The accountability Zooms where you show up and you write and then you say bye. But I like being in the space. I'm excited to be a published author, and I would like to remain a published author. So my learning curve is kind of contributing to the groups that I am in, and kind of and getting in there and kind of figuring out the balance of being a hermit and being in my comfort zone and taking myself out of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Kristen?
Yeah, so when I published my first novel, it came out in 2022. I didn't know anyone really in the industry, and I joined the International Thriller Writers Association, and I've actually just recently joined Writers League of Texas. But joining organizations is the way that I have found other writers who are like-minded. And I will say too, I don't know if this is particular to the mystery genre, but people who write murder are some of the nicest people out there. They're very welcoming, very inclusive. So if you don't know what genre you want to write in, maybe try to kill somebody off in your book. So what I started doing is just reaching out to anyone that I heard on a podcast that I found was interesting, or anyone that I saw on Instagram who was doing something interesting writerly. And I would just send a message and say like, hey, I'm new to this and I really enjoyed what you said. I just wanted to introduce myself. And one of my best writerly friendships actually came out of that. My friend Olivia, she said that she just posted on Instagram and said, "Hey, I'm going to start writing a book, follow my journey." And I reached out to her and I was like, "Ooh, yes, please. I want to follow this journey." And then we got to meet in New York at the Thriller Fest, and now we're going on a writing retreat together in the spring. And so I think it's really a matter of just choosing to take our introverted writerly selves and put that aside occasionally to just reach out and be brave and try to connect with someone, because I think a lot of other writers are willing or interested in connecting, but often we have to be in our little bubbles in order to get the work done. But I found the writing community to be extremely welcoming. So
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Those are great responses. And I think I use a digital calendar, but the more I'm thinking about what you said, Lisa, I think I need to switch my view of it to monthly. I think there's something there. Um, so we're gonna take a look at, we have some audience questions here. Let's see. Do you have go-to questions you ask of your characters as you are sketching the character out and getting to know them? Kristen, do you want to take that question?
sure. Yeah, so my background for my education actually is in journalism. So we learned what's called a nut graph, which is at the top of the story, you try to answer as many of the 5 W's and the H that you can. And so I do a version of this with my characters. So for what it might be, what are their primary motivations? What is the goal that this person wants to attain? From Story Genius, you could take what are the misbeliefs that they have about themselves or the world around them. Then when could be, when did life change for them? The why could be, why am I setting or opening the story when I'm setting it? Like, what is so important about this moment in their life? So I do some kind of version of the 5 W's and an H for myself with each character. And since I'm usually writing books that have at least 3 or 4 different perspectives, 3 or 4 different characters telling the story, I do that with each one of them so that they can each have their own individual character arc that then feeds into the plot overall.
Oh, those are really fantastic questions. Kelis, did you have any questions to add that you ask of your characters?
I don't have questions that I ask of my characters. But what I do end up doing in revisions is I always, if something acts on the character or if the character performs an action, I ask myself, thanks to my editor, she's like stuck in my head, how do they feel about it? Because I tend to I overwrite, but I also do a lot of telling versus showing, the story develop. And so the question that I'm constantly asking when I say something about a character or when a character does something is, how do they feel about what they just did, or how do they feel about what just happened to them? It kind of keeps me in touch with their voice, and and it keeps me getting to know them over time, like as I write.
That's a great question. So the next question we got is, does your day job ever get in the way of your writing or writing process, and how do you make it work to balance both? Any tips to share in this area? Lisa, do you have any tips for us in that area, balancing your day job and your writing?
Well, to answer the other part of the question, does it ever interfere? Yes, all the time. I think that that's inevitable. I guess I would, I mean, I have lived a life as a writer with jobs that have been very connected to writing, even though they're not about me producing my own work, and others where I have more freedom to tailor it. It's still the same problem. I've found that if I look for opportunity in an open-minded way, like foraging is sort of the metaphor that I use, or the word that I use for it. I used to always fall back on the word of opportunistic, but that is, I think, I'm misusing it because it does have negative connotations to be opportunistic. But I actually that's how I feel. When I see some time, when I see some opportunity, I just try to go for it. And I try to reduce my suffering about the suffering, right? We can spend a lot of time feeling badly that we don't have time, but that too is its own waste of time, right? So to forage, I kind of think of myself as like a locavore, or I'm my own little farm to table system, right? Like what's available right now? Oh, okay. Is it like a little time I can steal on Mondays? Okay, let's do that. That's what's in season this week. And so, yeah, constantly looking at it as like a foraging kind of project, and not in a more negative cast, and being non-judgmental about the limits that just exist on a life, right? Which is part of not suffering about the suffering. Part of that suffering is we're upset with ourselves as much as we're upset with others, for having these limitations. And that too isn't very fruitful.
Yeah, that's really well said. Thank you. And Kristen, what scheduling hack do you have for us?
Well, one thing I do is I try to anticipate my busiest seasons at school. So I know late October, I'm going to be getting X amount of papers in on the Crucible, and I'm going to have a 2-week turnaround window. So that is not going to be the time for me to really put strict word deadlines on myself. I also try to keep at least one part of my week pretty free and open. So for me now at this stage of my life, and it wasn't always this way, Kelis, so it gets better. The kids get older. But for me now, it is Saturday mornings because my children are old enough that they're sleeping in until 11. So I know that I have from about 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. where I can just write uninterrupted and get in the flow. So if I don't have any other point during the week when I can do that, usually that's kind of what I call my golden hour to just get things done. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And let's see, we have a question about writing longhand. Does anyone write longhand, actually pen to paper? I'm on the computer so much for other work that it feels like I can be more creative outside of the computer.
I have done this at times in my writing journey because of the same reason, especially during COVID. I wrote longhand. I found that it's a lot slower process for me, but I don't think that that's necessarily negative. It definitely makes me consider my word choices, and it gives me a bit more space in the actual drafting of the novel. And I've heard that Ellen Hildebrand actually handwrites all of her novels and then transcribes them or has someone transcribe them and then turns out a novel every 6 months. I mean, she's about to retire, but before retirement, that's what she did. So she writes a lot about writing longhand if you wanted to look her up, Ellen Hildebrand.
Yeah, Nicola Yoon also writes longhand, which I think is fascinating. I wrote Finding Jupiter longhand, just because it was a passion project. I was going to self-publish it maybe on Amazon. So I wanted to hold it, like, and it was so great. And I can look at my journals and I can hold them. But then like once I sold it and had all those different editing processes and all of that, it's not romantic to me anymore to write. But in the early stages, when I'm, sketching out the character personalities and all of that, I like to use my handwriting for that, but I do not write longhand anymore.
What about you, Lisa? Do you ever write longhand?
I have a paper notebook, a small size notebook that I always try to have with me, in my bag or what have you for notes. And to be honest, at this point, I probably do that half on my phone, the notes app, and half on a paper notebook. I think that we all have to, in a sense, game ourselves. You have to just do what works best for you. And so if longhand is working best and that's a forever thing, terrific. If that's a sometimes thing because you've been, putting in extra long hours at work using your computer, then great, just go with that. I think that only be romantic about it if that's what helps you. right? Otherwise, don't be romantic about it, be practical about it. The romance can happen in other more meaningful places. Um, and I would say, because I do, so many of us at this point, we do so many things mediated by screens, right? So how do we kind of enter a different space? And I find that for me, I actually really like working on a computer because of how quickly you can revise and how quickly you can save new versions, like I was referring to earlier. So for me, it's actually much more creatively fluid if for me to at a certain point be drafting on a word processor. Um, but I can change other things. I can change what desk I'm working at. I can change what rituals maybe surround entering or exiting that space. And so sometimes taking the emphasis off of like the literal tools, but more into kind of the hallowed space that you're trying to create or conjure. Sometimes that, or, like committing to taking a 10-minute walk before you write, right? Like creating breaks or transitional almost rituals. To me can be as powerful as, an actually different format.
I love the idea of ritual. I know a lot of people, they make, they have a whole making tea ritual before they write. I love the idea of doing a 10-minute walk because walking really does get your brain going.
And I'll also say a really important part of the process for me that I think is parallel is reading aloud.
Mm.
That's an absolutely essential component. And so it too is like a whole shift, right?
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah. I don't think I've tried that. And someone I was talking to recently, before they started their writing for the day, they transcribed what they wrote, the last thing they wrote the day before. And I like the idea of not only transcribing it, but reading it out loud. Um, Good stuff. Okay, we have another question kind of related about this kind of idea of gaming ourselves, I think. But do you have any recommendations for setting up a writing space? Where do you usually do your writing and why? What works for you? Kristen, what about you?
I keep all of my writing supplies together, especially if I'm on an editing deadline. I'll have my stack of pages, maybe 200 pages, and my computer and sketchbook or notebook all in a pile so that I can take them and leave my house. I cannot stay here because of my 3 children. So I'm usually writing at coffee shops, or I've written in the car before. I've written at my kids' karate studio on the padded floor. So I'm usually on the go when I'm writing. Even on Saturday mornings when they're sleeping, I'll still usually try to go to a coffee shop just because I know I won't have any interruptions there. So my writing space might be a little unusual because it's never quite the same, but I always try to keep the same supplies with me.
Yeah. Please, what about you?
Yeah, I'm really similar to Kristen. I keep my go bag, my backpack ready, and I generally will write at the library. I live near two really great libraries, and because both my kids, not my toddler now is in school all day, so now I have the full day to write. But my husband works from home. My in-laws are here. So there's always sounds and activity and people. So I pack my backpack and I hit one of the two libraries that I like to frequent. And during the daytime when all the kids are in school, they're really quiet. And, I have my usual tables or even the quiet rooms. Sometimes when I really need like dead silence, I'll go into one of the quiet rooms. But yeah, I don't write I have a writing desk in my bedroom. I have a desk upstairs that's under construction currently. Sometimes I'll write on my teenager's gaming desk when he's at school. So I move around as well. But most of the time I'm packing that backpack in my tote bag and heading to a library.
Nice. I love that. Libraries are such sacred places.
Yes, they are.
We got a question from someone on YouTube. I've got thousands of files from work and writing. How do you organize files and folders? So we talked a little bit about this. Kelis, do you have anything additional to add to how you organize your files and folders when you're working on a project?
Yeah, no, I will be listening to answers though of people who are organized. I'm listening and taking notes.
Lisa, in addition to your folders for each poem, what additional organizational tips do you have for digital files?
Well, what works for me is it's like a cascading organizational structure from really big down to small. So I literally, it's very unimaginative, but I have a folder that's called Lisa file, right? Because I also have like a household file, and I have a file that is stuff I'm helping my mother with. So Lisa file, and then within there it's like work, writing. And within writing, it's it breaks down. So it's like pitching really large tents, and then within them pitching smaller and smaller tents. That kind of makes sense as they flow one to the next. When things are the same size and they're all spread out all across your desktop or your whatever those things are called. Like it's, I think that the brain is so easily overwhelmed. So for me, it's about a navigation from sort of it's like nesting blocks. I think that my philosophy would be like a nesting doll kind of thing, except you don't end up down, well, you do end up down to just one file. You found your way to that, the 20-second draft that's in the active poems file. That's 6 files down from where you first started. That's how I do it.
I love that. That's perfect, simple, easy. Yes. Kristen, did you have any additional filing tips or tricks?
Maybe just that I organize by year. So I'll have, and maybe this is more just from teaching, but teaching 2012 to 2013, teaching 2013 to 2014. And then sometimes I'll have repeated files that I use from year to year, but at least they're all in that one space. So I can know that this is the time of my life when I used XYZ.
Oh, interesting. I like that. It's a time capsule too. You have a capsule for each year. So I have one final question I would love to ask you all. Is there a piece of advice you've been given from someone that kind of just changed things for you, or that you carry with you in your writer's toolbox, that you would love to pass along to us? Kristen, what do you think?
Sure. I think that this is pretty common advice, but the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, the revelation was the idea to let your work rest. So I try to give myself at least 2 to 4 weeks between finishing a draft and then returning to it to edit. And that doesn't mean that I'm not doing any writing in between, but definitely nothing on that project. And if something does come to mind about that project, I'll usually email it to myself, or I'll start a file that just says notes and I'll put it in there, and then I'll leave it alone, because I know that if I look at any part of the book, it won't get that seasoning that I need it to have.
I love that, seasoning. Kelis, what about you?
I'll probably say, aside from, asking how a character feels about what's happening to them or about the actions they're taking, probably the biggest, I mean, it's probably a simple one too, is to show, to show more than you tell. Because I overwrite and my background is technical writing, for research, I kind of am programmed to just tell, what happens next. And but my learning curve is to always be constantly asking yourself, how can you show this backstory versus telling the reader what happened? Yeah, I'm constantly returning to that advice from my editor.
Yeah, it's evergreen for a reason.
Yeah.
Thank you. What about you, Lisa?
I guess I'd offer 2 small tidbits, and one is to trust your ear. And if you don't know what that means or how to, then work on developing your ear. I think that the ear is it's less fallible than many other kind of parts of our assessing faculty. When you stumble, when something doesn't sound quite right, when it sounds like it's stalling, that's like it's like a metal detector that finds the spots that need more work. And I guess I would also say that if you are boring yourself, you are certainly going to be boring a reader.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think when you're reading a draft aloud, that's when I most catch errors. And then also when you're not reading aloud and you find yourself skipping over sections, that's a big tell. Great advice. This has been a fantastic discussion. I cannot thank you all enough for being here and for sharing your process and all of your tools. I've learned a lot. I know our members have learned a lot. Thank you to our audience for being here tonight. Thank you all for spending Thursday night with us. And please buy their books. These are fantastic authors. Their books are incredible. Kristen writes page-turning suspense books that are fantastic. Kelis's book, Finding Jupiter, will make you cry. Happy Tears, beautiful book. Lisa's books are incredible. Dream Apartment blew my mind, is a beautiful poetry collection. So buy their books, support these authors, support book people, indie bookstores. And everyone have a good evening. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night.